Welcome to another NUCIDA video. If you like it, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and click the bell. Never forget our upcoming sessions. If you have any questions or hints, please leave a comment. Our certified QA experts will reply in time. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a simple functional test against a web application. Before I can start creating a web test, I need to prepare my browser for testing. Preparing the browser under test is important so we can ensure that the web objects are identified correctly both during test creation and execution. Once I prepare my browsers, I can begin recording my test. I'm going to create a blank keyword test in TestComplete and click on Record Test Steps to start the recording. We're leveraging the record and replay functionality inside of TestComplete to record a very simple functional test against our web application. So, I'm going to launch my browser, navigate to my web application, and begin my test. As I interact with objects in my application, TestComplete will record the interactions and store the information inside our name mapping repository for web objects. TestComplete uses XPath and CSS to identify objects. We're just going to fill out a Contact Us form as a user would and click the Submit button. Besides recording actions in our tested application, TestComplete can also validate information inside our tests. We can do this by adding various checkpoints. In this case, we're going to add a property checkpoint to our Contact Us page. A property checkpoint is a verification operation against an object property that has an expected value in the tested application. So, we use the Object Spy, hover over Contact Us, and grab that object. And then we're going to select the property of the content text, make sure it is equal to value on screen, and click Finish. Once my test flow is complete, I'm going to stop my test, and TestComplete will assemble the test steps inside of our keyword test. Here we can see all of our test steps in order in which they were recorded, beginning with launching our browser, going into our application inside of the specific page, and entering data on screen. We can also see the property checkpoint that we added at the end of our test. Not only do we get a list of our items, the operations, any values, and descriptions of our test steps, but we also have the ability to see the objects that we're interacting with through the test visualizer frames. The test visualizer takes images of the objects we're interacting with during recording. If we need to add test steps after we've recorded our test, we can record them inside of the test or use the operations panel and leverage one of the test steps. Thus, we can drag and drop into our test to continue our test flow. Now that we've recorded our test, let's run it and look at the results. I'm going to click Run, and TestComplete will replay the test as it was recorded. TestComplete would generate a test log for every test run. Inside of that test log, we can see the results of our test. In this case, we can see that our browser was launched. We entered the application, entered in some data, and created a property checkpoint that passed. We can also see at the bottom of our screen two images, an expected image and an actual image. The expected image is the image taken during recording. The actual image is an image that TestComplete takes during runtime, and that is how we can create a simple functional test against a web application. How can we identify web objects using XPath and CSS in TestComplete? When I record a test, TestComplete will automatically add objects that I interact with to our name mapping repository. The name mapping repository stores all the tested objects with their custom names and their identification criteria. TestComplete uses the criteria to locate the objects in my web application for simulating user actions over the object. To locate elements in web applications, TestComplete uses selectors. The selector can either be XPath or CSS selector. For each selector, TestComplete shows a brief description of how the selector works and shows us which object you're referencing. When locating the object, TestComplete will go through the specified selectors one at a time, in the order in which the name mapping editor lists them until it finds the object that matches its selector, or runs out of XPath or CSS identifiers. During recording, TestComplete will automatically map the object in question, pull the XPath and CSS selectors from the application, and add them to the name mapping repository. However, if we do want to add a specific XPath or CSS selector, we can simply do that here by clicking the Add button and then entering our XPath or CSS selector as needed. We can also remove any selectors, or if we need to, say for example, move any one of them up or down, we can do that as well. If the object under test is dynamic, we can simply amend any one of our identification criteria by simply replacing the string that changes with an asterisk, telling TestComplete that this object is the same. However, it is dynamic. If an object in our application has been modified to keep the identification criteria valid, you can update that object to match the actual criteria within the application. For example, let's say that during the test run, TestComplete is unable to find the Submit button. TestComplete will of course try to resolve the issue by going through all the selectors to see if they match the criteria for the object in question. If after exhausting this list, TestComplete is unable to find the object, then we can manually update the selectors that are associated with this object by highlighting the objects in our alias window. We can manually update the selectors to reflect the most current identification properties for the object. Simply selecting the alias, clicking on Update Selectors, and then using the object's by to point to the object in our tested application will provide us with the most up-to-date identification properties for that object. That's how we can use XPath and CSS selectors to identify objects in our web applications using TestComplete. Now I'm going to discuss the test visualizer in TestComplete. This TestComplete tool takes screenshots of user actions during test recording and playback. These images help you better understand what test commands do and find the differences between the expected and observed behavior and the state of the tested application. So let's say that you recorded a long test that contains many mouse clicks, keystrokes, and other user actions. When viewing the recorded commands, it may be difficult to understand or identify which control received a click or keyboard input. It would be far easier to identify these test tabs if the recorded commands were accompanied by screenshots. This is what the test visualizer does. It captures screenshots during test recording or playback for each user action, mouse click, keyboard input, menu items, etc. This screenshot helps you better understand what actions the test commands perform. The test visualizer captures images for keyword tests and scripts. It captures images only for those test commands that correspond to user action. Other commands do not have screenshots, so during test recording and playback, images captured during test recording are shown in the test visualizer panel below the keyword test or script editor. The entire panel looks like a series of slides or a digital flipbook. The test visualizer marks the commands for which an image was captured with this icon here. When you select an image in the test visualizer panel, the test visualizer automatically highlights a test command related to the respective image. Double-clicking on that image will bring it to a larger scale. The object with which a command works is marked with a red frame around the image. We can also see exactly where we clicked on the objects. The captured images illustrate test commands and make analyzing the recorded test much simpler. Besides capturing images during recording, the test visualizer also captures images during the test run. It captures images for each test command that simulates user actions and posts these images to the test log. You can see here at the bottom of our screen, we have two images, an expected image and the actual image. The expected image is the image that TestComplete takes during recording. The actual image is an image that TestComplete takes during playback. We can compare the two side by side to make sure that TestComplete is interacting with the correct objects, drop-downs, menus, etc. In addition, you can configure the test visualizer to collect data. To do this, select the Capture and Test in Objects Properties mode. This way you can use the Capture and Test visualizer frames to insert commands that work with objects shown in the images to test. We can even turn off the test visualizer during either the test run or recording to save space on our hard drive. Now we're going to discuss checkpoints. Sometimes in your test, you may need to perform various verifications. For example, you may need to check whether a file or database contains appropriate data, or maybe make a comparison to web pages with TestComplete. You can do this using comparison commands called checkpoints. A checkpoint is a comparison or verification operation that is performed during testing. These operations are an essential part of the testing process because they can check whether the tested application is functioning properly. You can create checkpoints during the test recording as well as design time. Inside the Operations panel, there is a checkpoint menu that shows us all the checkpoints we can add. For this video, we're going to focus on property checkpoints. In TestComplete, The checkpoint menu shows us all the checkpoints that we can add, or we can also use the checkpoint wizard to walk us through the steps by dragging it into my test and choosing the property that I want to validate. We're going to validate the property of an object, but you can see we can also validate images, files, tables or grids, the contents of an entire database, or web metrics. Once I've chosen the checkpoint that I want to create, all I need to do is select the object that I want to validate. So, I'm going to take the object SPY and drag it over the object in my web application that I want to validate. In this case, I want to make sure that when we run our test, your inquiry has been successfully sent to the store owner and is validated on screen. When I release my mouse button, TestComplete will grab the object. We'll be able to see it in our preview window, and if I want to double check, I can click on the Highlight on Screen button. This will highlight the object 3 times when I click Next. All I need to do is choose the property or properties that I want to validate. TestComplete gives us a list of some of the properties that we can validate right away. But if these properties are not the ones that I want to check, I can simply click More Properties and have a list of all the properties associated with the object in question. In this case, we will stick with the content text property, and we do want to make sure that that condition equals the value on screen of your inquiry has been successfully sent to the store owner. The conditions are flexible. Thus, we can optimize these. For example, if we want to validate that only a certain word or words or numbers are in the value, we can do that, or do not equal. We can even enter regular expressions once we choose the property. I'm going to click Finish, and you can see that we've added the property checkpoint. Now when I run the test, property checkpoint will compare the actual value with the expected value and post the comparison results to the test log. Here in our log, we consider the property checkpoint has passed, and if we click on the Details tab, it will display the difference between the expected and the actual property values if there are any. As you can see, the expected value matches the actual value, and that is why the property checkpoint is passing, and that's how we can create checkpoints. Now, I'm going to demonstrate how to perform data-driven testing with TestComplete keyword tests. Data-driven testing means running automated tests that simulate user actions over an application with different input data. This way, you can provide larger coverage and ensure that the application works properly with different datasets rather than with just one set of values. When creating data-driven tests, you'll need to have some data to use in your tests. We recommend that you store this data in external files or data storage. This way you can include more values in your test without modifying test commands. For instance, if you store values in a file, you may simply append more rows to the file without modifying your keyword test or script. We have a sample keyword test that fills out a contact us form and then submits the data. Let's modify it so it adds several user submissions. We're going to get the data for this test from an external file. TestComplete can pull data from an Excel file, CSV file, database, or table variable by creating data inside. We're going to pull data from an Excel worksheet. In my sample keyword test, all I need to do is select the operations that I want to repeat, right-click, and choose Make Data Loop, and then I simply need to choose my table type. In this case, we are going to be working with an Excel spreadsheet and then locate the file that we're going to work with. Let's click View Sheet just to look at the data. So this is the Excel spreadsheet that we're going to be running through TestComplete, and each time the test iterates, it will enter that new set of data. Here, clicking Next, we get to choose the number of records that we want to run through TestComplete, and then the last thing we need to do is update our values and match our parameters with the values inside of our Excel spreadsheet. Accessing the drop-down, we can see that the titles in my Excel spreadsheet match up to the name, email, and message, and then click Finish. We can see there that we've added the data-driven loop. We can see the value, where it's being stored, and how many records are being run through. We can then see the hard-coded values in my test have been replaced with the variables inside of the data-driven loop. For the name, the email, and the inquiry, we can see the variable inside the Variables tab. If we need to change the name, the data type, or the default value of the worksheet, we can do that here. Let's run this test and see the results. When I click Run, TestComplete is going to replay my test and substitute my hard-coded values with the values inside of my Excel spreadsheet. Once the test is finished, TestComplete will generate a test log for that test. and we can see all the tests that are inside of that test log. We can see here as we go through that the hard-coded values were replaced with the values inside my Excel spreadsheet. And if we look at the expected image versus the actual image, we can start to see as we iterate through our tests that the data is being changed. So we can see the first set of data is being successfully sent through the second set of data here, and then finally the third set of data. And that's how you can drive data through a test and test complete. Now, we know how to use data sets in keyword tests. So let's dive a bit into databases and how we can work with databases in TestComplete. In fact, working with databases couldn't be easier. With TestComplete's ability to connect to databases, we can read data from them. We can write data there, and we can also create data-driven loops that will extract values from a database to database table variables. We can also verify the contents of the database through a database checkpoint. We're going to start by creating a validation against our database. To do that, I'm going to create a blank keyword test, and then I'm going to choose a database table checkpoint and drag it into my test. Now all we need to do is give the database table a name and enter our connection string. You can see that all ODBC providers are built into TestComplete. In this case, we're going to use the Microsoft ODBC provider for SQL Server. Click Next and add server name again, and then choose the database that I want to validate. Here we can select the data source type. In this case, we're going to select our database table, and you can see our name here. These are the columns that are inside of my database, and if we want to see the data, we can click Preview and see the data inside of that database that we're going to validate. Now, we have a database table checkpoint added to our keyword test. We also have a storage folder that was created. That's going to hold a copy of our database. Now, when we run our test in TestComplete, we'll compare the file inside of our stores with the live data inside of the database, and if they match, we'll have a passed test. You can see in this case that we did run our test, and the database table inside of our stores folder matched with the live database, giving us a passed test. Not only can we validate data inside of a database in TestComplete, but we can also use a database table to create data-driven loops to run new sets of data through our tests with data from our database table. In this case, we're going to use our contact use test and create a data-driven loop. Then we're going to give our variables a name and choose database table. And then again, all we need to do is connect to our server, select the database, and view the table. Then we can choose how many records we want to run through our test. Now all I need to do is match up the parameters from our test to the values inside our database table. So now we've added our data loop to our test. We can see the name of the loop, where it's living, and how many records are going to run, and then the hard-coded values in my test have changed to the variables from the database table. When I run this test, TestComplete will pull the data from our database and insert it into our application. We can see in our test logs that the new data has been added to our test. We can see that the expected image is the same image with the original sense of data. The expected image contains the updated data that has been sent through our test, and that's how we can work with databases inside TestComplete. Now I'm going to discuss using variables when you're creating tests. You may need to define some common data to be used in multiple tests, or need to pass data between tests. For this purpose, TestComplete allows you to create and add variables to your test. TestComplete provides us with various types of variables. So, when creating variables, TestComplete allows us to store them in different places. For example, we can store our variables in a project and the project suite. These allow us to reuse our variables across our entire project suite or a specific project folder. We can also add variables to specific keyword tests and pass information or data from the variable into a hard-coded value. Now we're going to create some variables to replace the hard-coded values of my login and password information on my web application. To do that, I'm going to click on the Variables tab. This allows us to create a variable of the keyword level. Now I'm going to press Add Variable and give our variable a name. So we'll call this login, and we also have different types of data that we can work with: strings, integers, objects, and tables, just to name a few. But we're going to leave this a string, and we're going to add a default value here. I changed the variable name. We're also going to add a second variable here for our password, and in this case, we're going to set our type as a password variable. And when we do that and enter our password, you can see that it is encrypted. Now that we've created our variables, we can add them to our keyword test. So, What I'm going to do is select my value that I want to replace with the variable, click on the ellipses, change the value from a constant to a variable, and then choose the variable that we've created. And then we're going to do the same thing for our password. Now when we run this test, we'll pass in the variables from our variable table into our test and replace the hard-coded value with the variable values. Let's run this and see how it looks. As you can see, the variables have been passed through our test in both the login and password fields, replacing the hard-coded values I set during recording with the variables we just created. At the project suite level and the project folder level, we can add different types of variables. A temporary variable is something that we can add that is going to run once, and when that test run is finished, reset to the original values. Persistent variables will change the local value in our test every time we run the test. We can also create data-driven variables, such as a data-driven loop that will replace multiple sets of data within our TestComplete test. And that's how we're able to use variables to pass data inside of our test. Now we're going to discuss test logging and report summaries. When we run a test in TestComplete, TestComplete will collect the information of all the actions our tests performed during that test run and provide information here in our test log. A test log is automatically generated anytime we run a test. The test log will show us detailed information on all the executed tests, including any script routines, keyword tests, low-level procedures, etc. It contains the result of test operations for our tests and can also include images of the tested application. In this case, we're able to see an expected image in an actual image. You already know that the expected image is an image taken during recording, whereas the actual image is taken when TestComplete runs the test. TestComplete will also take an image of what it's interacting with, so we compare the two side by side and make sure that our test case is running properly. To analyze test results better, you can filter out the information and see only what you are interested in. For example, you can turn off all the other options and just view any errors. Or if you wanted to view checkpoints and events, you could do that, or any messages as well. When it comes to sharing information in our test logs, we can send this information to Jira. We can share this information online or send this information via email and export the full logs to an MHT or an HTML folder. If we run a group of tests together, TestComplete will generate a test execution summary panel. Here we can see the results of all the tests that we ran together, and we're able to see an example of how many of those tests were run, and of those tests, how many passed, failed, or had any warnings. We're also able to see the duration of our test run, and we're able to see the user computer that was run on a date and timestamp. We're also able to see the order in which our test cases were run. If we need to take a closer look at any of our test cases, we can click on the link here and dive deeper into our test log and examine those test messages. And those are the test logs and the reporting functionality in TestComplete. Now, I am going to show you how to parameterize your tests in TestComplete. Unlike variables, which are named pieces of data that are used throughout your tests, we can use parameters to easily pass data into other tests. Recorded tests contain hard-coded values that we enter in during recording. When we run these tests, they'll work in the same manner and input the same data every time we run these tests. If we need to run our test with different sets of values, we will need to change the hard-coded values inside of our test, or we'd have to create a new test. But by replacing hard-coded values with test parameters, we can make our tests easier to modify, more flexible, easier to maintain, and reusable. Let's look at a sample test against my online web store. In this test, we're going to fill out a contact form and enter hard-coded values. You can see this here. But by adding parameters to our test, we're going to be able to change the data from the hard-coded values to the test parameters when we run this test. To create a parameter, I'm going to click on Parameters and add a new parameter. We'll create two parameters, one for the name and one for the email. We can change the types here, but we're going to leave both as strings for now. All we need to do is update the values inside of our test with the parameters. So, changing the value of the hard-coded name to a test parameter and then adding the value here of name. And for the email, we're going to change the value again from the hard-coded value to the test parameter and then change the value to email. The parameters that we've created do not have default values, so we're not going to be able to run our test as is because the test engine does not know what values to assign to our parameters. But we can run this test from another keyword test and fill in the values from that keyword test, or we can even run it as a test item. In all cases, you must specify the values of the parameters to run your tests. Let's see how we can run a test from a keyword test. I'm going to create a new blank keyword test. Inside our new blank keyword test, I'm going to add a run test step for my operations panel and choose the test that I want to run. In this case, it is the contact us test. And now I'm going to add values to each parameter. Let's specify the parameter values for the name and the email. Okay, let's run this test. When I click Run, TestComplete is going to replay the test, go into the contact test form, and fill out the values with the parameters that we set in our test. We can see in our results that we've run the test successfully, and the values from the parameters have come over inside our test and are being entered here. We can even run this as a test case inside our execution plan. To do that, just drag and drop the test that we want to run and add the parameters here from the parameters field. And now, if we run the test, TestComplete will run our contact test and enter the values of those parameters inside our test at the execution level. And that is how we can parameterize our test cases in TestComplete. If you like it, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and click the bell. Never forget our upcoming sessions. If you have any questions or hints, please leave a comment. Our ISTQB, ITK, X-ray, and TestRail certified QA experts will reply in time or even produce a separate video about your topic. Please also check out our other over 200 videos about software quality. Happy testing. See you next time.